Please.
Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 93 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. We are resuming the meeting suspended last Thursday. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
A hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application, but I don't think we have anyone using Zoom today. While public health authorities and the Board of Internal Economy do not require mask wearing indoors or in the precinct, masks and respirators are still excellent tools to prevent spread of COVID-19 and other respiratory diseases, and I'm encouraging the use strongly. I want to take this opportunity to remind all participants of this meeting that screenshots and taking photos of your screen is not permitted, and remembering that this room is equipped with a powerful audio system and feedback can occur, and it does harm the hearing of the interpreters, so please try and be careful not to have too many things all sitting next to the microphone so there is too much feedback. And so we're returning debate on the amendment, or resuming debate on the amendment of Peter Julian, which is an amendment moved by him on the original motion from Rachel Thomas. Now, Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Since I tabled the amendment, raising concerns about Meta's role, and this is the role of Meta in disinformation, has been flagged in the European Union, flagged in the United States. Meta has simply been appallingly bad in promoting disinformation and stoking, I would suggest, an amplification of hate. So the reason why I'd offered that amendment to subpoena Rachel Curran, who's head of public policy for Meta Canada, was because of Meta's appalling role in disinformation. Now, subsequent to this, two other factors have come to mind, Madam Chair. First, we have a role to review, to look at CBC and its mandate, and I understand that the president of CBC, Catherine Tait, is actually coming before us on November 2nd. So it's kind of superfluous to look into or to have a motion on the CBC when CBC is already appearing in front of this committee. Secondly, Madam Chair, I wanted to bring you and the committee's attention to an extraordinary piece of investigative reporting by Canadaland, Jesse Brown and Karen Pugalis, that appeared just this last weekend. And so these are two very effective journalists. They went into what they saw as a major source of disinformation. And they called the heading of the article is the anti-Trudeau hate forum based out of Cairo. This is a major source of disinformation in Canada. The YouTube channel Street Politics Canada, since April 2022, it has published approximately 600 YouTube videos catering to an audience of Canadian conservatives. In the last 12 months, their videos have received more than 10 million views. It turns out, thanks to Jesse Brown and Karen Pugalis, who looked into this and showed real investigative reporting, it would be great to see Postmedia, that's heavily subsidized, actually do some investigative reporting. But they found out that Street Politics Canada is actually run out of Egypt, specifically the 11th floor office of a company called Geek Labs in the Cairo neighborhood of Degla. The former Street Politics social media manager conceded that if we told people we were Egyptians talking in Canada, yeah, the company would not get the success that they have. And so this is a major source of misinformation. The social media manager goes on to say, we knew that our audience were the Conservatives in Canada. So this is something I certainly hope that the member from Carleton and Conservative MPs are not retweeting or amplifying this blatant disinformation that is foreign-based, foreign interference I find it appalling that this has played such a key role in the Conservative infrastructure. So the amendment that I offered is to look into the disinformation that we're seeing on Meta. But I think it's fair to say there's a broader problem of disinformation writ large. And that is something that it would be entirely appropriate for our committee to look at. So I'm sure my colleagues will have comments on the amendment. I'm beginning to see in the face of these two pieces of important information that what we probably actually need is a motion that allows this committee to undertake a study into misinformation and disinformation writ large, particularly at a time that is so troubling after the Hamas terrorist attacks, and now we see the loss of civilian life in Gaza because of IDF bombing. This is a major concern, I think, to all Canadians, that we get good information. I think it is fair to say that CBC has done an exemplary job. They have been extraordinary. Their journalists have often laid their lives and continue to lay their lives on the line. And I think an attack on CBC and CBC's independence is inappropriate. I do think the fact that we've got the president of CBC coming forward means that Mrs. Thomas's original motion is kind of moot, that we already have CBC coming before us. But the broader issues of disinformation, I think, are something that this committee should absolutely take on. And I'm particularly interested in the comments from my colleagues to see what direction we should take. I'm beginning to think that my sub-amendment isn't the most appropriate way of doing that, given the surprising disinformation of foreign interference used by the Conservative infrastructure and by Meta's appalling actions in fomenting and amplifying disinformation through the course of the last few weeks.
I think I have a point of order for Ms. Thomas. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just curious. He just used the term conservative infrastructure. Now, I'm familiar with infrastructure being used by Beijing, the Communist Party, in order to interfere on social media. And so I'm curious if he is then calling Conservative Party
That's
of
not
Canada...
a point of order, Madam Ms. Thomas. That's debate.
No,
it's
Madam,
not a point of order. I'm sorry, Ms. Gladue, does everyone have the amendment in writing, as Mr. Shield had asked? Peter Julian's amendment? Okay, thanks. So we're going to speak now. Have you finished, Peter?
Just,
go ahead.
Yeah, just a final comment. Again,
Point of order.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. I'm just hoping that the member can clarify what he means by conservative.
So a point of clarification is what you're asking for, not a point of order. Thank you.
Sure, that does.
Mr. Julian, go ahead. You have the floor.
Yes, so this Egyptian troll farm, heavily financed by the United States, rampant foreign interference, says that they have catered to an audience of Canadian conservatives and that they know that their audience were the Conservatives in Canada. So I'm just reciting this Egyptian troll farm that has provided appalling levels of disinformation to the Canadian public. And raised concerns, of course, about to what extent it's being amplified here in Canada.
Thank you. Ms. Now, if you finished, I have a list for the amendment. Ms. Gladue.
Thank you, Chair. First, let me start off by saying how continually offensive it is to me that Mr. Julian's always trying to spread disinformation and slander the Conservative Party. I, for one, have never heard of the magazine he's talking about. So I just wish he would stick to the motion. I agree his amendment is probably not what we need. We already have a study on big tech that is going to have Facebook and those folks come. Ms. Curran has been before committee before. I'm glad to hear that Catherine Tate is coming because she did publish an opinion piece in the Toronto Star called How to Rebuild Trust in the News. So certainly she's recognizing that there's been an erosion of trust and 40% of Canadians are not trusting the media. So I think we asked for her for 2 hours and she's only coming for one. So we might be able to do something about that. And then what I would say is I do think that we don't want to get too broad in this study. The whole idea was there was this timely issue where one of the directors at CBC instructed the journalists how they were to refer to Hamas and that they were not to call them terrorists. We've seen the BBC come out since and say, clearly they're terrorists and they do, come back to a position where they're going to report
Point of
the
order,
facts.
Madam Chair. Sorry. Ms. Ledoux mentioned that that Catherine Tate was coming only for 1 hour. If I'm correct, the motion only asked for her for 1 hour. Just for Mr. Shields' motion was to ask for 1 hour. I just wanted to confirm that.
Would have, when Ms. Gladue had finished, I would have clarified that and see if the committee would like her to come for 2. We could ask her, but at the moment, I'm letting Ms. Gladue finish her thought.
Sure, and to be clear, the amendment of Mr. Julian was to eliminate her altogether, and the original motion that the amendment was made to called for her for 2 hours, so that. The other thing is just to make sure that we focus this on trying to make sure that we have free and independent journalism and not extend the study so broadly. We do have our safe sports study. There is some urgency to getting back to that. And so I don't like Mr. Julian's amendment for sure, but those would be my points. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Gladue, and again, I will go back to the point that the original motion to ask Ms. Tate to come was for 1 hour only. And if the committee feels it would like to expand that to 2 hours, I would instruct the clerk to do that. But how does the committee feel about that very quickly? No? Okay, there's shaking of heads. So the 1 hour we will leave it at. Now, I have Ms. Thomas.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair. I am curious, the motion that was put forward and then the amendment that Mr. Julian has offered, the amendment does change it quite substantially. The point of the motion is with regard to the CBC and holding it to account as a public broadcaster. Peter Julian has offered an amendment to hold Meta and Google accountable, which is very different. And so I would ask for the chair to confer with the clerk and determine whether or not this amendment is in order based on the original intent of the motion.
I will ask the clerk, but I think the amendment is in order. It says that your motion is not expanded enough, and that Mr. Julian would like to expand this to other forms of misinformation, disinformation, etc. But clerk, his amendment is in order. Yes.
It's your ruling, so it depends if,
Yes.
as you said, it expands on the main subject.
So go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
So sorry, so
Rappel au règlement.
Yes.
Je serais intéressé d'entendre.
On a point of order, I'd be interested in hearing the clerk's answer. I heard you speaking together, but we didn't actually hear what she actually said with respect to the whether or not Mr. Julian's motion is admissible. So I'd like to hear exactly what she said. Thank you.
Clerk.
So in the end, it is the chair's ruling. My advice was that the chair can determine if the additional information raises a completely different question, or if it is irrelevant to the main motion, then it would be out of order.
Yes, Martin, go ahead.
Simple curiosité.
Out of curiosity, Madam Chair, I understand that your verdict is that the amendment to broaden the scope of the motion tabled by Ms. Thomas does comply with the spirit of the motion. And the way I read it, that is Ms. Thomas's motion, is that we want to question CBC on a memo that was sent to journalists in the newsroom. So it seems to me this is quite limited in scope, whereas the amendment suggested pertains to a much broader issue. It seems to me that this subject is somewhat different from the actual scope of the motion, but I respect your decision and I will listen to your reasoning.
Thank you. My reasoning is simply that in Ms. Ms. Thomas's motion, she didn't only ask for the CBC to be summoned. She wanted to invite the ombudsman to appear for a minimum of 2 hours to address the CBC's position on journalistic standards and practices. And Mr. Julian's thing expands journalistic standards and practices, and that's exactly what he is trying to do. So I thought it was in order. Thank you. Now, Ms. Thomas, have you finished your statement?
No, I have
Go ahead.
not. Madam Chair, on that point, I just would bring to your attention that the motion that I moved had only to do with the CBC. It was simply naming 3 individuals from within the CBC that should be brought forward to this committee. And it is within the jurisdiction of this committee to hold the CBC to account because it is a public broadcaster under the mandate of the Heritage Minister. Peter Julian's motion moves away from the CBC and in fact strikes from the record the invitation to bring Catherine Tate, the head of the CBC, and his motion actually moves into the private sphere that this committee actually doesn't have jurisdiction over, pertaining to the news coverage of Google and Meta. And so I would contend respectfully that the motion has in fact been changed quite substantially by this amendment.
Thank you. My ruling stands, however, and so if you finish speaking to that.
Thank you.
Can I go to Mr. Wall? No, you've not finished. Go ahead.
Thank you.
No, okay.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would challenge your ruling.
Would you like me to call the question?
I would challenge your ruling.
All right. Please, clerk, calling the question.
So the vote is on sustaining the decision of the chair. Mr. Coteau.
I vote in favor of the chair's decision.
Ms. Dillon. Ms. Gainey. Ms. Hefner. Mr. Noor Mohammed. Mr. Waugh.
Against.
Mrs. Thomas.
Against.
Ms. Gladue.
Count.
Mr. Shields. Monsieur Champoux.
Je vais m'abstenir.
Mr. Julian.
Oui, pour.
That is 6 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you very much. Ms. Thomas, would you have any further comments that you're making on Mr. Julian's amendment? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I further have a question for clarification then to the chair, and I suppose perhaps we could consult with the clerk. And my question is, within Mr. Julian's amendment, he uses the word subpoena, that the committee subpoena Rachel Curran. I am wondering if, according to the standing orders, does this committee have the power to subpoena a witness?
Yes, we do. If the witness lives in Canada, as far as I'm concerned, and it's a Canadian. Sorry. Yes, you.
Correct wording is summon.
It's not subpoena, but summons. Peter, just for information.
So
But I think we
again,
understood what was meant.
Thank you. So the amendment does read subpoena, and so I am asking a question having to do with this exact language. I understand that this committee has the ability to summon. That's not the word used in this amendment. And so my question is, subpoena has a legal framework attached to it. Does this committee have the power to subpoena Rachel Curran?
I think the power to subpoena. Mr. Julian, obviously, Ms. Thomas is debating or arguing that the term summons should be used instead of subpoena.
No, it's
But do you mean subpoena, which is a legal connotation?
I agree with
You
Mrs.
agree
Thomas,
with Ms.
and
Thomas.
I accept her offering as a friendly amendment to summon.
Madam Chair, that's actually out of order. I wasn't asking for Mr. Julian to weigh in, nor am I offering a sub-amendment, to be clear. I'm simply asking for the chair of this committee to make a determination as to whether or not we have the power to subpoena a witness. Does this committee have the power to subpoena a witness?
I actually have seen committees subpoena a witness before in extreme circumstances, but I think the power to subpoena is here with committees on specific and extenuating circumstances. But in this instance, I did not think Mr. Julian meant subpoena when I read it because of the context in which it was written. I thought he was talking about someone's.
So, Chair, I'm hearing you say that you have seen in the past committees here on Parliament Hill have subpoenaed witnesses.
Yes, I have. I've seen them subpoena prime ministers and specific people who have, some kind of legal authority. I've seen that happen, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, if you're finished, Ms. Thomas, so can I move on to the next person on the list?
I'll just make this point. No, I'll let it stay there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to speak on this. I am surprised that Mr. Julian continues to defend the Canadian Broadcasting Company when, in fact, Canadians have lost trust in the CBC. And, I looked at last Thursday's article. That was a contributor herself, Ms. Catherine Tate, the CEO of CBC Radio Canada. Her first word, do you trust the news? Well, obviously, she feels trust in news has waned, including her organization, because she held a summit in Toronto last Thursday in conjunction with the Toronto Star. I go on, when I read her contribution in the paper, we have a problem. Yes, you've got a big problem. And Canadians are putting forth $1.4 billion in a public news agency that, quite frankly, over the last 2 weeks, we've lost faith in the CBC. Whether that faith being lost, not calling Hamas terrorist organizations, that now we've seen officially in Britain, BBC, backtracking on that, and we still haven't heard from CBC whether or not they're going to call Hamas what they are, a terrorist organization. And it's especially troubling, Madam Chair, when I look at the Toronto Star, and some say, well, why would you look at that? Well, I get a general perspective from all media. I read a lot of newspapers, I read a lot of blogs, and even Rosie DiManno, who does a Toronto Star opinion piece published on the 23rd of this month, we should call Hamas what it is. That is coming from the same newspaper that joined with the CBC last Thursday night to talk about, do you have trust in media? This is one of their own, Rosie DiManno, this is one of the Toronto Star's own columnists. And, she's calling out even the news media herself. We should call Hamas what it is. And Hamas clearly is a terrorist organization, which wasn't called out when the CBC first started, and have not called Hamas what it is. It's a terrorist organization. So we do have a problem. And I certainly would like to hear from the head of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, who feels almost 60% of Canadians feel that the Canadian news source are trustworthy, but that 40% are either unsure or don't agree that it is trustworthy. I would like to hear her connotation on what she's doing with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and how to gain back viewers and listeners on the lack of trust. She has admitted that there is a lack of trust in this country with news organizations. I was once a journalist for over 40 years. I can tell you the scope has really changed, and it has not changed for the betterment, as Canadians are starting to question where they get their news and trustworthy. The furious response from many who believe CBC-Radio Canada has let them down. Yes, you have let us down. And we look forward to you, Ms. Tate, coming to committee because we have a lot of questions. Madam Chair, I also agree with the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, who last week had a memo to many MPs. I don't know if it hit all 337 of us, but referring to the ample evidence that has now been shared by Israel authorities demonstrating that a misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket was actually responsible for striking the Gaza hospital last Tuesday. And they go on. It's a fairly in-depth letter that most of us got it from CJA. All those who rush to condemn Israel without any evidence at all have a responsibility to correct the record and come and apologize. They also have a responsibility to condemn. You know, I go back to CNN when it first started and the Gulf War, where CNN was established, Madam Chair, on the backs of the war from the Gulf War era, where they went 24/7, 365 days a year. And that was the world's first real look at war. I'm upset when news agencies come out first and, in this case, describe that the hospital got hit, many were injured. War doesn't need to be, I'm first in line with this breaking news. All news agencies in the world must step back and, instead of being the first to report it, get it right. How can we be trustworthy when we know that information later was false? So there is no rush in war to get it right first. Get it right and get it out into the media, whether it's social media that many have picked up on, and the CBC, if you don't mind me, Madam Chair, very good on digital. But they made a major mistake that day. It did not hit the hospital. It hit the parking lot. And it took them a while to correct it. So here on one hand, we have the president of the CBC, Catherine Tate, saying Canadians have kind of lost faith in media. And then we see two examples which I just brought out. And, you know, she needs to answer for this. And I feel for the Center of Israel Jewish offices. I feel for them because, as they said, spreading unverified information has real-life consequences, including here in Canada, after politicians and Canadian media promoted the Hamas narrative that Israel targeted the hospital. Several emergency rallies were organized across the country, including one, Madam Chair, that we had just right outside the Shaw Center last week when all the leaders were involved in anti-Semitism. We had a lot of organized rallies. We can speak from firsthand experience that all such rallies, which claim to be protests against Israel, in fact target Canadian Jews. And according to the organizers, more than 1,000 individuals gathered outside their anti-Semitism conference where calls for violence against Jews were made that night. Canadian elected officials, which is all of us around the table and many more, but the second part I like even more, the media and other influencers have a responsibility to verify the facts before commenting, particularly during times of war. By promoting this Hamas lie, the lives of Canadian Jews were put at risk. That really sums it up from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. I think Ms. Tate, with her editorial in the Toronto Star last Thursday, hit it right on the nail. But I would say to her, what are you doing as an organization to regain at least 40% of Canadians who have lost faith in your newsrooms across the country? And I will say this, and then I'll wrap up here. I am disturbed in the fact that when I was a news person, we had a line in the newsroom that you couldn't cross. Management, we often had those salesmen coming in, can you promote this, can you promote that? I'm sorry, there's a line of editorial in this newsroom. And I fear with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that line has been removed. I am concerned about the journalistic standards set by George Atchie and his crew, and I would like to have him invited. I'm getting there in a second, plus the Ombudsman, which is Jack Nagler, who received hundreds of responses on the false narrative that CBC has done twice. One, lack of calling Hamas a terrorist organization, and the second one with the bombing of the hospital, which never took place. And the ombudsman needs to come to committee and explain what he is hearing and what he is going to do to correct the narrative of Canadian news. Now, I know Mr. Julian from time to time has his picks on this newspaper and that newspaper, but I want the national broadcaster here. They are being subsidized at least $1.4 billion by the Canadian taxpayer, and I am disturbed what I have seen and heard from the national broadcaster the last 2 weeks in this country. Yes, they're over there in Israel and dealing with delicate situations, but they have not handled this the way the professional standards of broadcasting should be handled. First is not always the best. We have seen 2 massive errors done by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So if I can, Madam Chair, I would like to have a sub-amendment to Mr. Julian's amendment, and it reads as such: given that Hamas has been declared a terrorist organization by the government of Canada since 2002, and the horrific Hamas terrorist attack against Israel left thousands of innocent people dead and injured, and that both European Union and the U.S. lawmakers have raised concerns about the false and the misleading content about the Israel-Hamas conflict being spread. Now, here we go with the changes, if you've got Mr. Julian's amendment in front of you. The 4th point: the CBC receives $1.4 billion in public funding, and $1.4 billion.
Rappel au règlement là-dessus.
Point of order?
C'est le rappel au règlement.
Not million, but it's B with the B.
C'est une demande de clarification, Madame la Présidente.
It's a request for clarification, Madam Chair. He said that the changes begin at the 4th bullet. In the 3rd point, mention is made about conflict between Israel and Hamas, but he didn't mention Meta platforms. So I would like to know if Meta platforms is going to be contained somewhere in his sub-amendment.
Mr. Wall?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and I would like to thank the honourable member from the bloc. He is correct on the 3rd bullet. I did, on purpose, eliminate on Meta platforms. But in the 4th bullet, I have what I think I can bring everyone together, if you don't mind. The CBC receives $1.4 billion in public funding, and that Meta and Google, other media platforms, receive over $1 billion in indirect subsidies annually through taxpayer dollars, and that this committee has a mandate to review government expenditures. So, Madam Chair, that the committee invite, and I know I've stroked the word subpoena and we've talked about it, but I just want to invite Rachel Curran, the head of public policy with Meta Canada, to come before the committee and summon the president of CBC, Catherine Tait, to appear for 2 hours, not 1 hour, but 2 hours by herself within the next 7 days, the motion being adopted. Now, I'm hearing rumors that, in fact, Ms. Tait is coming on next Thursday, November 2nd. So I would like it for 2 hours. And then B, invite the CBC Director of Journalistic Standards, George Atchie, and the CBC Ombudsman, Jack Nagler, to appear separately for a minimum of an hour and a half each to address the CBC's position on journalistic standards and practices. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does everyone have that sub-amendment? No. Do you want, have you got it in writing?
I do have it in
Kevin,
writing.
please.
Unfortunately.
In both, but it's not
Yeah,
translated.
It's not translated.
Yes, Martin, sorry?
Madam Chair, I move we need it translated. Needs to be in both.
So we will have to suspend while that sub-amendment is written and translated. So I suspend the meeting.
Merci.
Thank you. Peter, point of order?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. When I see this sub-amendment of Mr. Waugh, who I have a lot of respect for, what he's actually doing is trying to reverse the sub-amendment that I put on the table. So I am not convinced that it is in order for what Mr. Waugh should be saying simply is he should be voting against my amendment to ensure that we come back to the main motion, though, as I mentioned earlier, Madam Chair, I'm beginning to think we should withdraw all of this and start again with a fresh study. Anyhow, that being said, what he's trying to do is reverse an amendment. That's not something that would normally be in order, given the very clear intent of my amendment.
I suppose what I wanted to say, Mr. Julian, is that in many ways I agree with you, because the putting in the bit about asking Ms. Tate to come and to appear for 2 hours was not in your amendment, so that this is now adding something that's completely different to the sub-amendment. But anyway, we're noting this, but I also have Ms. Gladou's hand up.
Yes, on the same point of order, I think the other difference is that they've asked these other two representatives from CBC for an hour and a half each, so that is different than what was in the amendment.
Yes, thank you. Now, Mr. New Mohammed.
I was going to simply say two things. One is that I agree with Mr. Julian. I don't believe that it is in order. But if it is in order, and we are indeed in this room with everyone sort of having their views, perhaps we could move to a vote quickly and just see where we land on it and keep moving, because we have lots of important work to do.
Are you asking to adjourn debate on the sub-amendment?
If that is something we can accomplish, that we can get to a vote on this important sub-amendment, I think that would be helpful.
That's dilatory, so we can't debate it, sorry.
Point of order.
Asking to adjourn the debate where we don't vote on the motion.
So you're asking for a vote on this? Yes, Ms. Thomas?
We currently, right now, we are discussing a point of order that was raised by Mr. Julian. On a point of order, you cannot move a motion.
I don't know that you actually did move a motion, Mr. Nur Mohammed. You're just asking that we go to vote?
That's a
Was
motion.
it in the form of a full motion?
No, it was not, Madam Chair. My comment was simply that I believe the motion to be out of order. That's my opinion, and you are the chair. You get to decide these things, of course. And given the important work that the committee has, my suggestion to the committee was simply that we get on with the business, and if we know where we stand on this, but it is not by any means a motion. It was just a suggestion in the spirit of keeping the committee moving forward.
Okay. All right, so that I shall actually rule that the sub-amendment is out of order, and therefore we can just move on.
Point of order.
Sorry.
Point of
yes,
order.
Ms. Thomas.
I would ask for the chair to justify her ruling. Look, Madam Chair, if I may, you have an amendment that asked for the CBC to be the only focus of study. The chair then permitted for an amendment to be brought forward to that original motion that expanded it to big tech, metal, and Facebook. Then it has a sub-amendment that simply respects that massive expansion and asks that an additional third CBC witness be brought forward. You already have two, and you're adding one. And somehow the addition of a third CBC witness now makes it out of line? I would ask for the section in the Green Book, the standing orders, that would confirm the chair's ruling.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just curious if Ms. Thomas is challenging the ruling of the chair, and if so, we could perhaps see what the will of the committee is and move forward.
I'm simply asking the chair to be respectful of this committee and give us the benefit of the reason for her ruling.
Ms. Thomas, it's fair enough for you to ask me to explain why I'm making the ruling, but I think the little drive-by thing that basically says to respect the committee, these things I don't think are very, when we have a meeting, we should be respectful of each other. You're presuming to know what I'm doing and what I'm saying. So please don't presume my intent. Thank you. Okay, so now, it is not a debate, Ms. Thomas. It's not a debate.
It's a point of order.
You just implied that I was
It's a point of order.
disrespectful.
It's a point of order.
I hope it is.
It's a
Go
point
ahead.
of order. Madam Chair, I just asked you, I gave you the opportunity, I'm inviting you to help us understand your ruling.
Ms.
That
Thomas.
is far from assuming.
You
I am
said
inviting
was-
your voice. I am inviting the chair to give a reason for her ruling.
I intend to do that, Ms. Thomas, but you also had to add the spurious piece that said I'm disrespecting the committee. I don't think we need to do these things at committees or in the House or anywhere. Let's treat each other with some respect. You're presuming that I am intending to disrespect the committee. Don't. Please don't. So now, I think that, for me, I think that I agree with Mr. Julian and Mr. Nur Mohammed's comments that, that what we have done here is there is what has been put in this that I didn't think was fitting and was appropriate was that it removed Meta platforms, first and foremost, and it did not, Ms. Thomas, we're not having debate, you and I am speaking, please. Allow me to finish. Thank you. So in the second one, it removed Meta platforms. In the third bullet, it just mentioned Meta and Google received money, but it does not actually say that Meta should be summoned, which was in Mr. Julian's amendment. So I think it changes the whole tone and meaning of the amendment that Mr. Julian made, and that was my reasoning for suggesting that it was out of order. Thank you.
Point of order.
Yes, Ms. Thomas.
Sorry, I think Kevin Waugh has a point of order first.
Yes, Kevin?
Sorry, Madam Chair, but it clearly states that the committee invite Rachel Curran. It's right there, the head of public policy for Medic Canada. I disagree with your ruling here. I have it right here that the committee invite Rachel Curran, head of public policy, Medic Canada, to come before the committee. And also, then I go on to talk about the CBC, but it's right there.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Right. Mr. Nur Mohammed.
The decision of the chair is not debatable. They are welcome, Madam Chair, to challenge the ruling. Chapter 20 of the Green Book states that decisions of the chair are not debatable. They can, however, be appealed to the committee. To appeal a decision by the chair, the member knows the process, inform the committee of the intent, the chair calls the question. That is the process. So if that is indeed the desire, I think the committee should entertain that request. But we are right now doing something that is entirely wasting the valuable time of this committee.
Debating. So now, Ms., you had a comment,
Madame la
Martin?
Présidente, oui, tout à fait. Puis
Yes, Madam Chair. I find these discussions quite interesting, but I'd like just to, if we could bring the tone down somewhat. Ms. Thomas and you, perhaps you won't be at the same Christmas party this year. That's clear. But I think the question raised by Ms. Thomas and Mr. Waugh, these questions are quite legitimate. I'm curious to know why you feel that the sub-amendment is not admissible. With all the respect that I have for you, Madam Chair, I'm a little bit perplexed because what we see here in the motion submitted by Mr. Julien can be found in Mr. Waugh's sub-amendment. And earlier, I asked you whether or not Mr. Julien's sub-amendment was in fact admissible because it broadened the scope of Ms. Thomas's motion, and you said that it did respect the spirit of the motion. It just broadened the scope. So we're dealing with the same parameters here. A little bit of information has been changed. But I must say I don't understand. I'm not taking a position for or against the sub-amendment. I'm just saying when you consider all the tension in this committee right now, I think we need to do a little bit of education here, and I think we should hear the arguments without, in this particular case, Madam Chair, I think Mr. Waugh's arguments I think that you should perhaps reconsider them or perhaps explain your decision in greater detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I was just responding to the way in which Ms. Thomas posed her question for me to explain. She decided that I was disrespectful of the committee without having allowed me to even explain. I made my explanation, as you heard. Mr. Waugh disagreed and pointed out to me that he felt that he had, in fact, wanted Meta to come in and didn't completely remove it. So I think I will pay attention to what Mr. Waugh said and agree with him on that. And so what I would ask is that we then go to, I think Mr. Nur Mohammed was asking us to vote on the sub-amendment. Yes, Ms. Thomas.
Madam Chair, there has been no motion moved to go to a vote on this, and we do have a speaking list. I'm one of the individuals on it.
Sorry, yes, Ms. Thomas. And then who do we have? Okay. So, Ms. Thomas, go ahead. Speaking on the sub-amendment, and then Ms. Gladue. Anyone else wanting to speak on the sub-amendment? No? Okay. So, Martin Shields? Peter? Julian? All right, so we go to Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for listening to the voices around this table and for taking them into consideration and reconsideration. And thank you for allowing this sub-amendment to stand. The truth is, my colleague, Mr. Waugh, moved the sub-amendment, and therefore I believe by default the floor is his, because all of the points that have been stated so far have been points of order. We have not actually returned to debate on the sub-amendment. And so out of respect for my colleague Kevin Waugh, I would cede the floor to him, and I would just note that I am on the speaking list next, I believe.
Yes, all right, after Mr. Waugh. Now, Mr. Waugh, we're going to sub-amendment. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I wish, tensions can be high in any committee, but I am going to give you praise for allowing me to speak first and saying I did have Meta involved, and you did see that, and you reconsidered, which I appreciate very much. All I'm trying to do with this amendment, sub-amendment, is bring everybody together. Some people want social media here. I hear that. Some want CBC. Some want ombudsman. Some want the journalistic standards, which I agree with everybody. So that was my effort today, to listen to others around the table and to kind of compromise. And that's what I was trying to do, whether it's going to be successful or not. I used the analogy of the CBC because of the $1.4 billion subsidy they are getting yearly. And then I used Meta and others because they are receiving over $1 billion in ads from several parties and several government agencies. So that was the intent, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, of my sub-amendment, is to bring everyone together and let's hear them all. So I thank you for reconsidering, bringing my sub-amendment forward, because that's all I was trying to do, is the CBC we've heard, and social media, Meta, and those trying to bring them here to have a full understanding what is going on in the news agencies in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Ms. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going to let that complete.
It's the curtain. Closing time.
I guess so. Okay, thank you. Are we okay? Okay, perfect. Sure. So with regards to my colleague Kevin Waugh and the sub-amendment that has been offered, notably the big change here, of course, is by this point in the game, we have Peter Julian in his amendment, Meta and
Point of order, Madam Chair. Mrs. Thomas is very experienced committee chair. I let her be degrading twice, but the correct characterization of any member around this table would be Mr. Julian. And so I would hold Mrs. Thomas to being respectful to all members of this committee.
I didn't, okay.
Ms. Thomas, please refer to Mr. Julian.
Yeah, my apologies. I was certainly not meaning any ill intent. I'm happy to call him Mr. Julian. Mr. Julian, would you forgive me for that?
Yes, he will.
No, genuinely, I'm sorry. I wasn't meaning to through the chair, I'm happy to take responsibility for that. That certainly wasn't my intent.
But please remember to speak through the chair.
For sure. Again, through the chair, I would ask Mr. Julian if he would be willing to extend forgiveness, because it certainly was no intent, not my intent, to cause any harm.
Mr. Julian?
Of course, Madam Chair.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate.
Now, go ahead, Ms. Thomas, finish your thought.
Thank you. Mr. Julian moved an amendment to the original motion. His amendment expanded it to include Meta and Google, and then now we have sub-amended it to put the CBC, the head of the CBC, Catherine Tate, back into it. Arguably, we've now expanded the scope of this study quite significantly. The chair has ruled it in order, and so it's the motion as amended and then as sub-amended that we're discussing, and it's been permitted to stand. My concern is that this committee is overstepping its boundaries in terms of what its scope of study should be. We have the ability and even the mandate to hold the CBC to account because it is the public broadcaster of Canada. It is paid for solely by public dollars, and it is the responsibility of the House then to hold the CBC to account. To hold the CBC to account is different than telling the CBC what to report. Those are very different. The way that we hold to account is by inviting witnesses to come to this committee and to ask them questions, and for those individuals then to provide responses. To bring Ms. Tate is absolutely essential because she is the head of that organization. And in fact, just had her contract expanded recently for an additional 18 months. And so clearly then, some confidence has been demonstrated toward Ms. Tate, and her organization, the news broadcast, is making some decisions that are quite alarming to a number of members here at this table, but more importantly, to members of the Canadian public. And I would like to highlight my main concern in all of this when it comes to Ms. Tate and the way that she is choosing to lead the CBC. Because I do think that there is certainly that there are some things that deserve the utmost consideration here at this committee, and why it is so important that she not be omitted from this need for study. Ms. Tate, the head of the CBC, recently published an article on October 18th talking about how trust in journalism is diminishing, and therefore it is incumbent upon journalists to report in a way that is fact-based. And in this article, she uses this phrase, fact-based reporting, over and over and over again. And she talks about how the news needs to be accurately reported. What I find interesting, though, is that she came out with that article only after the CBC actually ran with a number of falsehoods in their article. So I would have to ask, what about these facts? What about the facts that hundreds of people were slaughtered in a night? What about the fact that 40 babies were beheaded? What about the fact that women were killed, they were raped, and they were paraded through the streets? What about those facts? What about the fact that since 2002, Canada has listed Hamas as a terrorist organization?
Ms. Thomas, I think we would remember that we're speaking to Mr. Waugh's sub-amendment and not to the main motion. I think Mr. Waugh's sub-amendment has asked Ms. Tate to come and appear before us. I think Mr. Waugh's sub-amendment has said that Meta and Google should appear because this committee has a mandate to review government expenditure. So are you speaking to the sub-amendment, for the sub-amendment, against the sub-amendment, or are you speaking to the main motion?
Sorry, Madam Chair, what was the nature of the sub-amendment that we moved?
I don't know. It's in front of you, Ms. Thomas.
No, I understand it according to my perception, but I'm curious as to you as the chair, how you might interpret it.
I am trying to understand, Ms. Thomas, whether you are debating the sub-amendment or whether you are speaking to the main motion. Because the sub-amendment is pretty clear on its reasons for wanting to look at Meta. It talks about reviewing government expenditures, pretty clear, and having Ms. Tate arrive and speak to us for 2 hours instead of 1. It's pretty clear, and asking George Aichi and the Ombudsman to come. It's pretty clear on all of those things. So I don't understand your points. Are you speaking for or against the sub-amendment? I would like us to focus, please, on the sub-amendment. Thank you.
Madam Chair, the sub-amendment that has been moved by Mr. Waugh, the main focus of that sub-amendment is adding Ms. Tate as a witness.
So you're agreeing with the sub-amendment, is that it?
So, Madam Chair, my entire statement had to do with Ms. Tate and the importance of bringing her to this committee. So I'm baffled as to the confusion. Could you please help me understand so that I can clarify?
I'm sorry, I did not understand your points. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas, and be mindful that we're speaking to the sub-amendment and not the main motion. That's all I'm reminding you. Please remember that.
Madam Chair, I do feel a bit berated by you, and so I am confused because I was speaking specifically about bringing Ms. Catherine Tate, the head of the CBC, to this committee and why that is important. And yet I feel corrected by you that I am somehow not speaking to the sub-amendment. So can you please clarify for me how I am in the wrong?
I did not say you were in the wrong, Ms. Thomas. I'm asking you to focus because you made these points when you spoke to your main motion many times, and so I just didn't know where you were going with it.
So generally when someone is interrupted and told to stay focused, it means that they're somehow not focused.
Not
so I'm
necessarily.
hoping
I
that
think
you
you
can
want to
help me
focus, yeah?
understand so that I
Ms.
can
Thomas,
respect
please,
you, Chair.
with respect for the committee, can you continue? Just remember to focus on the sub-amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Again, you're issuing a correction, asking
Yes.
me to focus on the sub-amendment. So I'm curious as to where I was going wrong and how I might better be able to focus on the sub-amendment, which is to bring Ms. Tate to this committee.
It would be up to you to decide how to do that. Focus, Ms. Thomas, I was just listening to you continue those same statements you made when you were speaking to the main motion. And I wondered if you wanted to speak to the sub-amendments specifically, which is to, as you can see, to invite the president for 2 hours within 7 days of the motion being adopted, to add, to appear separately for the Jack Nagler and George Aishi to address the CBC's position on journalistic standards and practices. So those are the new things that have been added. Meta has been added as well. So if you wanted to speak to those issues, fine. But I just think, one can continue to reiterate the same points over and over and be mindful of the fact that we need to move on this committee and be efficient. Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Would you speak to the sub-amendment, begin your arguments? Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Thomas, I really don't want to engage in a debate with you. Would you please continue your debate on the sub-amendment? Thank you.
I would love to discuss the sub-amendment. I just want to make sure, though, the sub-amendment doesn't say anything about Meta or Google being included, and you just stated that it did. So I just want to make sure that we're clear as to what the sub-amendment is.
I don't know if you have it in front of you. It's
Yes,
the
Madam
CBC
Chair, I do. That's the
received
amendment.
1 point. Now,
But
I'm
not the
looking
sub-amendment.
at the sub-amendment where Mr. Waugh, in fact, explained that he did, in fact, want the Rachel Curran to come to speak about Meta. It did say that.
Which was a
That's
part of
why
the
I
amendment.
allowed it, yes.
Yeah.
So he did continue with that because I had thought he had removed it completely, and he pointed to me that in his next bullet he did not. Now, Ms. Thomas, I really do not wish to indulge in debate with you. If you have the floor, please speak to the sub-amendment. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't wish to
Ms.
debate
Thomas,
either.
you do wish to debate me, and I don't wish to debate you anymore. I've ruled that you should continue to speak. You have the floor. Please speak to the sub-amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Thomas,
I
please
do
speak,
just-
or I will remove you from the floor and give it to someone else.
That would be quite something. That would be quite something.
Ms. Thomas, please speak to the sub-amendment and be respectful of everyone in this room who want to move on here. Thank you.
So for the benefit of those that might be watching this committee, I could not have been more on point with the sub-amendment. I could not have been more. The sub-amendment adds Ms. Catherine Tate into the amended version. and I was speaking exactly to Catherine Tate as the head of the CBC coming to this committee.
Mr. Cotto?
Is it possible for us can we just take a pause for 5 minutes? Is that possible? I think this is pointless. What we're doing here is pointless. 80% of the time for this meeting is being taken by the member opposite, and we're getting nowhere. Maybe a small break would just change the environment at this point, because it just doesn't seem productive.
I think I have explained to Ms. Thomas that I wish her to continue to speak to the sub-amendment, and I do not wish to engage in any debate. But Ms. Thomas insists on continuing with the debate against my ruling on speaking to the sub-amendment. So I cannot stop because she has the floor. I could ask her to be on a point of order to go back to the topic at hand, but I don't know that Ms. Thomas wishes to do that. And I would like to hear from this committee whether they wish Ms. Thomas to continue to speak on the sub-amendment and not continue to try and make a point and debate the chair, which is what she continues to do.
Yeah, so I'll make a point of order that the members stick to the sub-amendment.
Ms. Thomas, please continue to speak to the sub-amendment.
The main focus of the sub-amendment that has been brought forward to this committee that we are currently considering is that Ms. Catherine Tate, the head of the CBC, appear at this committee for 2 hours. The reason why that is important is because Ms. Catherine Tate, which is the focus of the sub-amendment before this committee, is the head or chief of this broadcasting organization, which is fully funded by the Canadian public to the tune of more than $1.4 billion annually. And so it is appropriate then for Ms. Catherine Tate to come and to answer questions that members of this committee might have with regard to her conduct and the decisions that she has made and the decisions that those under her watch have also made. The purpose of the sub-amendment that has been brought forward is that she would come for those 2 hours and that we would then have an opportunity to gain clarity or understanding as to what her intentions are with the public broadcaster. And more specifically, you'll recall that the purpose would be to ask Ms. Catherine Tate, the focus of this sub-amendment, questions with regards to her decisions pertaining to coverage around the conflict currently taking place in Gaza. That is the purpose of this sub-amendment. The reason why this sub-amendment is so crucial is because of this. Ms. Tate wrote an article for the Toronto Star that was published on October 18th, and in it calls for trust to be restored in media. And she says that the best way to do that is by being fact-based. And she uses that term over and over and over again in the article. So my question for Ms. Tate would be, what about the facts that her bureau decided to redraft? Or what about the facts that her bureau omitted altogether? What about the fact that hundreds of Israelis were attacked and slaughtered in the night? What about the fact that women were raped, murdered, and paraded through the streets? What about the fact that 40 babies had their heads cut off? What about those facts? And what about the fact that the hospital bombing wasn't actually a hospital bombing, it was a parking lot? And what about the fact that it wasn't an Israeli airstrike, as the CBC reported, but actually a missile from Jihad? And what about the fact that Hamas is a terrorist organization and has been listed as such since 2002 by the Government of Canada? These are the facts that the CBC has the responsibility to put out to the public. But these are the facts that the CBC has determined to omit or rewrite. And so it is absolutely incumbent upon this committee to hear from Ms. Tate. The reason why this is important is because she is the lead of this organization and therefore responsible for the decisions that they have made and the so-called journalistic standards.
Order.
Yes, Mr. Couto.
I'm just, isn't Ms. Tate scheduled to come here?
She is for an hour. This
Yeah.
one asks for her to come for 2 hours, I think.
So no one's disputing that I think it's scheduled already. Yeah. So I don't understand. Like, we all know that, right?
Point of order.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
be consistent in your
Thank
ruling.
you.
This is not a point of order.
Ms. Thomas, please continue. Go ahead.
I was interrupted by my colleague who raised what he called a point of order, but actually isn't. It's a point of debate. And he raises the point that Ms. Tate is scheduled to come on November 2nd for 1 hour. I wonder if the chair might help us understand the reason that Ms. Tate is coming on November 2nd. Perhaps the clerk could revisit
Point of
the
order,
original
Madam
motion and
Chair.
help us understand
Ms.
the purpose.
Thomas.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Mr. Nur Mohammed.
I'm not clear at all how this has anything to do with the sub-amendment that is currently being discussed, and perhaps I'm slow, but I thought the direction and the expectations that we're discussing, specifically the sub-amendment, not providing philosophical points of view on other motions that are already before this committee or that have been passed by this committee.
Ms. Thomas.
I believe we are on a point of order from Mr. Coteau.
Ms. Thomas, I'm
And-
chairing this committee, please. And Mr. Coteau made a point of order that I allowed to stand. Now I ask you to continue.
Thank you. I was commenting on his point of order.
And I didn't ask you to do that. Go ahead and continue. I rule on points of order, not you, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do believe that it is in the standing orders. If you seek it, you will find it. That when a member raises a point of order, another member can comment on that point of order, can engage in further discussion.
Go ahead then, Ms. Thomas, engage in further discussion. You obviously seem determined to continue to speak for the rest of this committee meeting and not allow your colleagues and others to have a say.
I think there was another point of order made, so that was the last point of order.
Yeah,
my
from
point of
Mr.
order, yeah.
Mr. Nur
So that one,
Mohammed's
I think
point
that's
of order was
exhausted,
clear.
My
Yes.
point of order.
Mr. Nur Mohammed's point of order is clear to stick to the sub-amendment, which I have been trying to make for quite a long time now. Ms. Thomas.
Madam Chair, just a moment ago, you asked me to be respectful of this committee. I wonder if the comment you just made with regards to assuming my intentions was respectful toward this committee.
Yes, I think it was.
Okay,
I
thank you.
think the committee is waiting to
you.
speak, and they are
Thank you.
asking you in their points of order to continue to focus on the sub-amendment and move on. Thank
I
you.
appreciate your clarity with regards to the definition of respect, because I think you and I have very different definitions. But now that I understand yours, I have zero problem adhering to that.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Go ahead and speak
Thank
to the
you.
sub-amendment.
Yes, the sub-amendment. The sub-amendment that Ms. Catherine Tate would come to this committee because she is the head of the public broadcaster within our country, and she is receiving $1.4 billion annually of taxpayer money to pay for.
Mr. Julian?
She's coming next week. She's coming in 9 days, so I don't understand the relevance.
Maybe you should ask for clarity on that. Is she coming?
Yes, I think the clerk said she was contacted and said she would come. But she was asked originally in the first motion to come for an hour. We are now, in this sub-amendment, asking her to come for 2 hours. So there you go. That's it. So we have not had a response because this sub-amendment has not yet been voted on and passed or not.
I have a comment on that point of order.
Yes, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. So based on that point of order, then, I would just ask if the clerk could confirm for us the reason for Ms. Tate coming on November 2nd.
Yeah. Clerk, please.
The committee adopted a motion to invite Ms. Tate regarding her reappointment for 1 hour. So I reached out to ask for her availability, and her office came back and gave November 2nd.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, would you continue
Thank you.
speaking
Further to that
the
point.
sub-amendment?
Further
Thank
to
you.
the point of order. I wonder if the clerk would then clarify as to what the reason we are asking for Ms. Tate to come based on the sub-amendment.
I think it's pretty clear in the sub-amendment, Ms. Thomas, that Mr. Waugh put forward. It's pretty clear. If I go back and read it, it was clear in the original amendment that Mr. Julian made. And then Mr. Waugh clarified that a little bit by adding that where it's to invite blah, 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 and summon the president of the CBC, Catherine Tate, to appear for 2 hours by herself within 7 days of the motion being adopted. And so that is pretty clear what Mr. Waugh was saying.
Thank you. So I just want to clarify then that my understanding, and I'm speaking to the sub-amendment now, the sub-amendment reads that we would be asking Ms. Tate to come to this committee then to answer questions specific to the CBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict.
Yes.
And the misinformation that has been spread there. That is the phrase that is used within the now sub-amended and amended motion. And so I want to be clear then that is a very different purpose than appearing at this committee to do with her reappointment for an additional 18 months. I agree with Mr. Julian that is important, and I look forward to having Ms. Tate here and having the opportunity to ask her questions with regards to her general mandate as the head of the CBC, certainly. But the sub-amendment that I have been given the opportunity to speak to has to do with Ms. Tate coming and answering questions specific to the CBC's coverage of what's going on in Gaza and Hamas's attack against Israel. And so having clarified that and hopefully bringing some understanding there, then I guess I would just state this, that it is important to hear her on this issue because as we are all more than keenly aware, it is taking center stage, rightly so, across the world. And it is a matter that is so important for us to get right as Canadians. And when the public broadcaster is supported by Canadians, they need to see themselves reflected in that space. And I think the Jewish population within Canada would be hard-pressed to feel advocated for or even accurately represented by the CBC. I think that is extremely sad. When the CBC, a public broadcaster then, has made the determination to put out false information, to release stories with great speed but lacking accuracy, as my colleague Mr. Waugh so aptly explained. And so Ms. Tate has a lot to answer for. And the reason why it's so important for her to be the one is because she's the one getting paid the big bucks. She's the one that's been put in that seat. She's the one who's been entrusted with being the lead of that organization, the public broadcaster. And so for us to omit that, as Mr. Julian's amendment tried to subscribe, or prescribe, I should say, sorry, this committee would not be doing its work. It would not be doing the work that it is intended to do. It would not be holding her to account or giving her the opportunity
Point of order.
to...
Yes, Mr. Julian?
Yes, could you clarify again, Madam Chair, that Ms. Tate is actually coming next Thursday? Because I find the debating point that somehow she is not coming to committee or that we're not able to ask her questions, I find it a bit disingenuous. Could you confirm that she is coming next Thursday?
She is coming next Thursday, clerk? Yes?
Correct, yes.
Right, good. So she's coming. I'm confirming that. Thank you, Mr. Julian. For one, it's very clear Ms. Tate is coming, and she's coming to answer questions of this committee. And when someone comes to answer questions of the committee is free to ask them whatever questions they choose with regard to their job description. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Thomas, you still have the floor.
So, yes, as I was mentioning, Ms. Tate is coming to this committee on November 2nd for 1 hour. That is correct. She is coming to speak to us with regards to her general overall mandate. The sub-amendment that has been moved, as the chair has asked me to stay focused on, has to do with Ms. Tate coming specifically concerning the CBC's coverage of the conflict taking place in Gaza. That is the purpose of the sub-amendment that has been put forward. It also asks that Ms. Tate would come for 2 hours, which would give us hopefully enough time to ask very important questions on behalf of Canadians. And in particular, very important questions on behalf of the Jewish community in Canada, which has very much been underserved by the CBC. And so with that being the case, with that being the sub-amendment that my colleague Mr. Waugh has moved, it is very important to note that that is distinctively different from the motion that was previously moved at this committee quite some time ago to bring Ms. Tate with regard to her general mandate. No doubt, I think we look forward to having her here on November 2nd. Mr. Julian, of course, has indicated that he wishes to praise her for the type of coverage that the CBC is providing. Of course, my Conservative colleagues and I have indicated that we have some tougher questions to ask her, and we're looking for clarification on behalf of the Canadian public. We believe in the role of the official opposition and the accountability mechanism that is in place there, because that is what sustains a strong democracy. Speaking of which, Ms. Catherine Tate, in her article that she wrote as a guest columnist for the Toronto Star, she actually wrote about what democracy requires. And interestingly enough, the committee might desire to know this. She said this, she said, it's essential that all news organizations tackle these challenges together. And she's talking about the challenges of being truthful, being credible. She's talking about the challenges of gaining trust. And so she goes on to say, we need to make sure that Canadians know where they can access verified, reliable news and information about their neighborhoods, their communities, and their country. I would agree with Ms. Tate on that statement. There's no doubt we do need to know where we can go for verified, reliable news and information. Given that the CBC has misreported numerous times over the last number of weeks, and given that the CBC is outright refusing to call Hamas a terrorist organization, I do have to wonder if she would count herself into the classification of, quote, verified, reliable news and information. I think Canadians deserve to know what her thought process is in that regard, and what she is hoping to convey through her news coverage that is currently lacking. But she goes on to say this, because we were talking about democracy and, of course, the role that the official opposition plays in that. She goes on to say this. She says, it's what Canadians deserve, and it's what our democracy requires. Again, I would agree with her. I would say she is absolutely correct that Canadians do deserve verified and reliable news and information, and Canadians do, in fact, require this in order for our democracy to thrive. Those things are true. Further to that, in this article, she outlines the importance of building trust. I would agree with that as well. I would say that there is an opportunity for our news sources across the nation to restore trust with the Canadian public. But where her and I might deviate is that my perception would be that in order to restore trust, you have to tell the truth. But she would probably argue that actually you can do your best to restore trust by just retelling or remaking the truth. I would disagree. And so, that said, there is an opportunity to hear directly from her and to understand the intent that she functions with and to understand the intent that the others within the CBC function with, whether that's the Ombudsman or if that is Mr. Achi, who is responsible for journalistic standards. There is an opportunity for all three of them to come to this committee and to be asked good questions and to be given the opportunity to express to us the strategy that they employ within our public broadcasting system. Further to that, there's an opportunity for them to tell us how they intend to use that strategy to best serve Canadians and restore the trust that Ms. Tate discusses in this article and outlines as being incredibly important as we continue to function in a democratic system and wanting to protect that. And so this is why it is so important that Mr. Waugh moved this sub-amendment and that it not be disregarded. I know that Mr. Julian tried to take the CBC, Ms. Tate in particular, out of the original motion. I recognize that he, for some reason, doesn't wish for
Thomas,
her.
we are speaking to
point
the
of order.
sub-amendment again,
Point of order.
and not to Mr. Julian's amendment. Thanks. Mr.
Point of
Julian?
order, Madam Chair. Yet again, can I ask you to confirm that Ms. Tate is coming before the committee next week?
You are not
We
consistent.
have
I will make
repeated
this
comments that are.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Order,
Point of
please,
order.
Ms. Thomas.
Point of order,
Mr.
Madam Chair.
Julian has the floor.
It is not a point of
And
order.
Miss,
It is not a point of
you
order.
do not chair this committee.
is not a point of
Ms.
order.
Thomas. I'm
Madam-
allowing the point of order. Sorry, Mr. Julian, you're asking.
If you could confirm once again that Ms. Tate is coming next week before committee.
Yes, I would like to ask to say that for the 9th time that Ms. Tate is coming next week on November the 2nd. Thank you.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Yes.
I would like to simply point out that the threat that was issued by Ms. Thomas towards the chair that she will make this hell is incendiary, inappropriate, and I would ask that Ms. Thomas apologize to the committee and the chair, and if not, that the chair take whatever action she feels appropriate, because that is not the environment that any of us need to be working in. Certainly not under in this current climate.
I'll wait for you to give me the floor.
Yes, Ms. Thomas?
Thank you. Point taken. I extend my absolute unreserved apology to this committee. It was inappropriate for me to say that. And
To the
you-
chair as well.
And thank you,
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair, and to
Thank
you
you.
as well. I apologize.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. You still want to debate the sub-amendment? I want to ask you not to verge into being repetitive and redundant, because you are making the points you have been making now over and over. So perhaps we can recognize respect, as Mr. Nur Mohammed talked about, to the committee means that I have 3 of your colleagues here lining up to speak on this sub-amendment. I have 5 other people on the committee lining up to speak on the sub-amendment. Miss Thomas, I'm speaking. Thank you. So we have a lot of people wishing to speak. Being respectful on the committee means that you acknowledge that everyone else has the right to speak. But if you choose to filibuster this committee, Miss Thomas, then remember that I can ask you not to be repetitive and not to be redundant. Thank you.
Is there a list, Chair?
I have a list.
Yeah, can I put my name on if that's possible?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Couture.
Thank you.
The speakers lined up in order are Ms. Gladue, Mr. Shields, Mr. Julian, Mr. Shampoo, and Mr. Koto. They're waiting patiently to be able to speak once Mr. Thomas has made her points that are not repetitive and redundant. Thank you. Ms. Thomas?
Madam Chair, I would just raise a point of order before I continue. I'm just curious if you can clarify the reason for Ms. Tate being brought in for 2 hours, according to the sub-amendment being currently discussed.
It's very clear in the sub-amendment that it was asked for Ms. Tate to come for 2 hours. It's pretty clear. I don't understand what your question is.
Sure. My colleague, Mr. Julian, was able to raise a point of order and ask you for, I believe, the 4th or 5th time to state whether or not Ms. Tate is scheduled to come on November
Yes.
2nd. And so I felt that it was my equal opportunity and right as a member of this committee to ask a similar question, which is I'm wondering if you can clarify for this committee why Ms. Tate is being invited to come for 2 hours within the framework of this
I can
sub-amendment.
clarify it because you are speaking to the sub-amendment. Mr. Waugh clarified it when he spoke to his own sub-amendment. And so this, I don't understand what your question is. Ms. Tate is being asked, until the sub-amendment is passed, Ms. Tate is only coming for 1 hour to speak to her appointment. And until this sub-amendment is allowed to be voted on and passed or declined, then we still don't have a question that I can answer you on, Ms. Thomas.
Can I ask a point of order? Just really.
A point of
I'm
information, yeah.
Point of order. If the member had the floor and the member asked for a point of order, does that mean she's released her opportunity to hold the floor because she brought up a new point of order?
I don't think so. She has a floor, and as Ms. Thomas well knows, she can speak for as long as she wants, unless she's, as I said, redundant or repetitive, then in which case I can ask her to cede the floor. But Ms. Thomas asked a question a couple of times. We cannot decide whether Ms. Tate is coming for 2 hours until we get to finishing discussing the sub-amendment and voting on it or against it. So in theory, I cannot answer that question, Ms. Thomas, because I cannot presume what the outcome of this will be. Thank you. Ms. Thomas.
The point that I was making before Mr. Julian raised his point of order was that the reason this sub-amendment is so important is because it would be irresponsible for us as a committee to hear from Mr. Achi and the CBC Ombudsman, but not hear from the CBC's CEO or executive. And so it is incumbent upon us then, I believe it is very important that we hear from Ms. Tate as the head of the organization and therefore the individual who is responsible for answering for its decisions. Again, drawing attention to the fact that this sub-amendment, to answer my own question, has to do with Ms. Tate coming in her regard as, in regard to the CBC's coverage of the conflict in Gaza. That is the purpose of this sub-amendment. And so it is not to be confused with Ms. Tate's general mandate. With that, I will leave.
Point of order?
Mr. Newman. Oh, sorry. Whose point of order was this, Peter?
That's mine.
Sorry,
Yes, thank
sorry,
you very
Mr.
much,
Julian.
Madam Chair. Can you clarify when Ms. Tate comes before committee next Thursday, would you be restricting questions in any way? Or would members around this table be free to ask whatever questions we would like to ask of the head of CBC?
Thank you, Mr. Julian. I'd like to clarify. I think I already did this earlier on when Ms. Thomas was speaking to the sub-amendment, that in fact, when Ms. Tate arrives here, she's arriving here. Originally, the motion that was passed by this committee was to have her come and discuss her role as CBC CEO, in which instance you can ask her anything about her mandate, about her intention, anything. There is no restriction on what you can ask her in that 1 hour. Thank you, Mr. Julian. I hope that's clear now to everyone on the committee. Thank you. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. I think it's easy in these scenarios, to be able to say one day this will happen or one day that will happen, and this opportunity will be given or that opportunity will be given. And again, sure, Ms. Tate, she has indicated that she is going to come on November 2nd to this committee, and she will be here for 1 hour, which will give, some members at this table an opportunity to ask questions, but certainly not all members at this table the opportunity, because time will not permit that. And so, again, having to do with her general mandate. But there's something actually really...
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Newmark.
As the meeting grinds on to an end, I would like to point out that we are now in the realm of Ms. Thomas being repetitive. I mean, the use of her own word of again is a clear indication that we are hearing the same point again, over and over and over and over and over. And perhaps, Madam Chair, we might be able to find a way to move on to the other voices, including from her own party, that have been trying to speak to this for some time.
Thank
But we
you,
really are now in the realm
Mr.
of
Newman.
repetitive.
We are. We have 5 more minutes, 3 minutes actually, left in committee, and no one else waiting on the list has had an opportunity to speak to the sub-amendment. And so, Ms. Thomas, have you finished with your points? Thank you. You have not. And I would advise you not to be repetitive and redundant, as you have coming close to being both. Thank you.
Madam Chair, when I use the term again, it's in reference to my colleague, Mr. Julian, raising points of order again and again and again.
Ms. Thomas, Mr. Julian is free, as is every member here, to raise a point of order anytime they wish. The chair listens to it and has to, before the chair can rule whether it is a point of order or not. I first must listen to what the member is asking. So I don't know why, Ms. Thomas, you try to continue to tell the chair that the chair, if you would like to chair this committee, Ms. Thomas, I would ask you to apply for yourself to chair the committee, but I'm chairing it. I wish you to continue to speak whatever you have to say. You have 2 minutes to finish your discussion on the sub-amendment brought forward by Mr. Wall. And I would ask you again not to be redundant nor repetitive. And you're getting very close to being both. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm not entirely sure, I guess, what it's interesting, because I'm getting my hand slapped in a few different ways here, and as a member of this committee, I believe that I have the freedom and ability to speak to the sub-amendment that is being discussed and to raise the points that I feel need to be raised on behalf of my constituents and on behalf of Canadians. And so the fact that I am being directed in such a way and that I'm being berated for responding to my colleague, Mr. Julian, and his repetitive points of order.
Point of order.
Mr. Couture?
Yeah, so again, the members repeating a point that's been made many, many times. I just want to say for the record in this point of order that, we've done some great work together on this, this report on safe sport. We've worked hard to really sit down with a lot of folks who went through some really awful moments. And we have a job to do as a committee. And we've done great work together. And I would just appeal to the members opposite, on the Conservative side, to speak to your colleague. Like, we just spent an hour and a half on the same issue, and we really need to get this report done. We went through 165 points the first day. The last meeting, we did nothing. This meeting, we've done nothing. So I would just appeal to the other members, please talk to the member who's really wasted a lot of our time today. So we can actually get this work done, and we can make recommendations to create a safer environment in Canada when it comes to the protection of a lot of young people and adults when it comes to sport. Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. The meeting is now
Can't
adjourned.
do a motion to adjourn.
It is now being 1 p.m. and the committee is scheduled to end its meeting at 1 p.m. I adjourn the meeting.